So if we talk about going into the underworld, I think most of us are pretty familiar with that term. When we go into the underworld, there can be some really intense emotions down there that there aren't stories to. And this is also why masks relate to Scorpio. I said before, the mask relates to Libra because it wants to be pleasing in the social sphere, so we'll put on the masks. I remember when we were young and I lived in Melbourne with all my cousins, and if we go out, we'd all go, all right, we've got to go and put our face on. Put your face on with all your makeup and, so you look pleasing. But with Scorpio, the mask isn't for that. So Rhett and I made some masks, and they go right back to the Greek theatre, the theatre of pain face. And the reason why they wore masks in the theatre was to convey the intense emotion, to be able to hold that emotion for the audience. And I just thought that was wonderful. Instead of hiding our emotions and how we feel, but actually to wear a mask to hold that emotion so that you can fully experience what that emotion is and allow that energy to be resurrected, processed and healed. So that when we say healed, it means coming back into wholeness, to remember who we really are, the fullness of ourselves, that we're not just here to put on a happy face, we're actually sensory human beings here. And so the emotional experience, we need to process the emotion so they don't go into the underworld and then come out in repressed and distorted ways because we're not aware of it, so we don't even see it. So that's how it becomes a shadow, and then we can project it onto others. So that was Rhett's beautiful mask. I thought he did a great job. And this mask is meant to be the look of very Scorpio betrayal and shock. Didn't come out quite as good as I hoped, but and I'll tell you the story about this mask a little bit later on. So going down into the underworld often is perceived at first as a very scary place because it's the unknown. We don't know what is down there. It's not only things that we need to process from this lifetime, but also previous incarnations. And that's why wherever Pluto is in the chart represents your deepest insecurities, unconscious insecurities, but also your power. So it's almost like a paradox. It's where you're powerless until you become conscious of yourself and your insecurities, and then you can come into your full power. So the same with the Scorpio energy relates to that power. So it's death, rebirth and regeneration, and then coming into our full power from our powerlessness and our deepest unconscious insecurities. The underworld is traditionally ruled by Hades, and Hades is not an evil god. He's not the god of death. He just simply rules over the underworld, which is where the souls go. We'll say that there are 5 rivers surrounding the underworld. From the earth realm down into the underworld, there are 5 rivers. And I won't say them because I'm aware of time. But basically, you can get into the underworld through these rivers. And so it's the same. And one of those is wailing, the river of wailing. So when you go into your deepest sorrow, it can take you into your underworld. If you allow for that, often we're scared though, we'll stop it because we feel like we're going to die. Again, that Scorpio energy. I feel like if I stay with this emotion, it's so intense, it's going to consume me and I will die. So that's enough. We block it, suppress it, put it away, sweep it under a rug. Scorpio comes along, get that rug out and beat all that old dust out of it. Right? So that's what happens when we have a Pluto transit. Some of us here will be in our Pluto square. It's when the rug comes along and gets pulled out from under your feet. Because we need to have a good shake up and look at what's in the unconscious. We can't keep pretending. We haven't been real with ourselves. And one of the myths that we do know of Hades, that he doesn't really have his own myths, but he's in a lot of other myths. And we actually know that he's not an evil person. He's a staunch ruler. He takes his position very, very seriously. But he's had visitors come down into the underworld, and he'll ask them, why are you here? And he'll create a little challenge for them. But ultimately, so if they are authentic in heart, then he honours their requests. And you can see that in a few of the myths where he's granted that. But in the myth of Persephone, at first he seems like a really bad person because he abducts Persephone. He had the permission of his brother Zeus to do so. They actually arranged it. And Persephone was tired of being under the rule of her mother. She was coming into age. She wanted to go and play with her friends, and her mother was very possessive of her. And she was like, wouldn't let her go. And Zeus said, Demeter, just let Persephone go and play with her friends today. It's a beautiful day. Let her go. So she did. And the daffodils had just come out in season, and Persephone plucked a daffodil from the earth, which is Hades' favourite flower, and the earth cracked open. And before anyone could see, Hades came up with his 8 stallion-driven horse chariot and grabbed Persephone and took her down into the underworld. And Demeter mourned and grieved Persephone for a long time, and she walked the earth, and no one knew what had happened to Persephone. And one day she came along Balbo, the belly goddess. Did anyone see our vlog recently? I brought Balbo up in there. Balbo is goddess. Instead of eyes, she has nipples, and instead of a mouth, she has a vulva. And when Demeter was weary in her search for Persephone, she sat down by the river banks, ready to just give up. And she'd been withholding her bounty from the earth as well, so there was no fruit. The riverbeds were drying up. Nothing was growing because this represented Demeter's mourning. And so along came Balbo, the belly goddess, and she was swaying her hips in a way that represented sexual intercourse, and she started to tell Demeter a few jokes, and eventually Demeter started to smile and laugh. And this restored Demeter to be able to get up and keep going in her search. And then she met with Hecate, or Hecate, it's pronounced both ways. And Hecate is the goddess of witchcraft and magic. So she's a very scorpionic kind of figure. And Hecate said to Demeter, why don't we go to Helios? Helios sees everything, the sun god. And so off they go, and Helios says, yes, I saw it all. And he told Demeter what had happened to Persephone. And so eventually there are negotiations. And Hades agrees to allow Persephone to return to her mother and the earth realm for 6 months of the year. And this is the season of spring coming back to earth. And when we start to get things coming to their full bounty for the summer. And then in autumn, Persephone is returning back to Hades in the land of the dead, where she co-rules with him. And I feel that that's a really important part of the story, because we just think of the abduction of Persephone, but what Hades wanted, he didn't want someone to put in it, as a trophy wife. He wanted someone to rule the underworld equally with him. So this represents that Hades is not evil. He's just very staunch, and he was lonely and wanted a wife, and Zeus agreed for it to be Persephone. So we don't hear of any other myths about Persephone being unhappy in the underworld once she had become accustomed to being there, which is a little bit patriarchal, but we're not going to go there in this circle. You can go in so many different directions with these myths. But the purpose of it is to give an understanding of the underworld, and that it's not an evil place. It's just where the souls go when they die. It's guarded by the 3-headed dog, Cerberus, and Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft. Her symbology is also the dogs. So they say Hecate's around when you hear packs of dogs barking. And Hecate is not evil either. In fact, she was traditionally seen as a goddess of midwifery. and the goddess that would protect the householder and bestow blessings upon the house, blessings of prosperity. And again, the underworld, Hades, represents when we go into the underworld. Hades' kingdom was made of gold and silver and full of beautiful crystals. So his actual place was not a dark, scary place, but very, very beautiful. And we know, so that shows us when we go into those deeper parts of ourselves that we're afraid to explore, we know that we're going to be able to have this extraction of our own gems, of our own treasures, because we get closer to who we really are. And that's seen in the myth of Inanna. When Inanna descends to the underworld, knowing that no one comes out of the underworld except Persephone, Hermes is a psychopomp, so he can go into the underworld back and forth. And also Hecate, she can go into the underworld, because what happened was Hecate actually each autumn escorts Persephone back down into the underworld and helps her get accustomed in the underworld again. And Hades was very grateful to Hecate for doing that. So he also made her a psychopomp, so she can go into the underworld and back up to this world. If you want to go down into your unconscious realms and you want protection, then you call up on Hecate to go with you. And she's traditionally known as the torchbearer. So she has 2 torches. So she takes the light into the underworld. Just like in Kundalini Yoga, we build the light first before we start doing our subconscious cleansing, because you don't go into the dark without the light. And the Tai Chi teaches that, the yin-yang symbol, half dark, half light, sunny side of the slope, shady side of the slope. But in the Tai Chi symbol, in the part that represents the light, there's a dot of black. The darkness is always there with the light. And on the dark side, you have the dot of light. So we can take light down into the darkness. You can't actually have one without the other, and that's what the Tai Chi symbol teaches us. So going back to Hecate, you can call upon her. And it wasn't until after this time of taking Persephone down into the underworld and being made a psychopomp by Hades that then she actually got the title of goddess of witchcraft. Before that, she was the goddess of midwifery. And so it shows us again, if you've had a baby or you've witnessed birth, you know how close you are. The veil between the worlds is so incredibly thin. And you're standing right there. Or if you have suffered tremendous grief and your heart is broken, you have stood right there on the edge of this world. And you can feel into those other worlds. And at those places, that's where Hecate is, because she's also the goddess of crossroads. Just like Hermes. Hermes is also to do with crossroads. So again, you can tune into either of these deities. And remember, these are just simply aspects of your own psychology. When we come up into the transpersonal, we realize that all these archetypes are within us and we can call on them at any given time. So you can call on your own inner Hecate, you can call on your own inner Hermes, whatever relates to what you need at that time to serve you. What part of your personality do you need to bring forth to face what life is giving you? And these are the archetypes that Scorpio, Pluto, 8th house remind us of. So as we can see, Hades is not such a bad guy. Just takes his job very seriously, ruling over the land of the dead. Hecate is not evil, putting nasty curses on people. She is actually helps people adjust into the darker places, and she brings the light with her. She's the torchbearer. She also is the triple goddess because she's usually depicted facing forward and then a face to the left and a face to the right. And this indicates her psychic abilities of being able to see all perspectives, which, remember, ultimately the eagle takes us up to see more perspectives than our own ego-based perspective, right? But there's another story that can represent going back into the more tragic side of Scorpio, and that's the story of Medea.